Viktory II. This is a game that I had no idea it existed, even though it came out a couple of years ago. I learned about it only recently from an ad on Facebook. You know how on Facebook when you start writing about this or that, you also start receiving ads that have to do with what you have been writing, which is a little weird at times, but at times it does allow you to see things that you may be interested in. And since, of course, I talk and write about games on Facebook, then I receive ads about those, and this is how I learned about this game. Viktory II is a game of strategic conquest for 2 to 6 players. It is played on a modular board that will change from game to game. This is a very basic, simple, straightforward game about war, so it is definitely a game that may work as an introductory war game or even a game that you just play with your non-war gaming friends. Anyways, this is pretty much what you need to know for now. Let's see how the game plays. The game is played on a modular board that is kind of Settler of Catan reminiscent. The size of the board will depend on the number of players that they're going to play. The larger the number, the larger the map. At the beginning of the game, you shuffle all the terrain tiles together and you place them on the board randomly and face down. Then you reveal 3 hexes for each player, and the location of the initial hexes depends on the number of players that are playing the game. Each player then places on the board his capital that is represented by a town that is placed on a plastic disc of the same color. That allows you to differentiate the capital from the other cities and towns that you will control during the game. Later in the game, when you add new towns to the map and your military units explore the map, you will reveal new terrain tiles, and in this way, gradually the entire map will be revealed. And this is how the map may look once all hexes have been revealed. At that point, the map will show one of endless combinations of water, grass, mountains, plains, and forest hexes. And if all hexes have been explored and revealed, that means that at the point the map should be full of units, but I just wanted to show how the map may look by itself. At the beginning of his turn, the active player can develop his urbanette by building new towns or upgrading a town into a city. New towns can be built 2 or 3 hexes away from pre-existing towns or cities of the active player, never adjacent. In that case, the active player simply places a new town on the board, or the active player can choose to replace an existing town with a city, which is represented by a larger building. Towns and cities generate military units. A town built in any hex will generate an infantry unit, which is added to your reserve area and is then placed on the board at the end of your turn. If you upgrade a town into a city in the plains, you receive a second infantry unit. You do not receive that infantry unit because you already received it when you built the town. And the same applies to these infantry units here. So if you upgrade a town into a city in the grass, you receive a cavalry unit. A city in the mountains, you receive an artillery unit. And a city in the forest, you receive a frigate. And again, all these units are placed in the reserve area and added to the board at the end of the turn. Now, a very cool concept in this game is that there is always a direct connection between the towns and cities that you control and the units that you have on the board. If you have a town and a city in the grass, you will have 2 infantry units and a cavalry unit, not a unit more, not a unit less. If you have a town and a city in the mountains, you will have 2 infantry units and an artillery unit, not a unit more, not a unit less. So if you take control over a town or city of the opponent, you also take control of the corresponding unit. You conquer a town of the opponent, you replace that town with a town of your own color. The opponent also loses an infantry unit and you gain an infantry unit. This is all the most important if you consider that units eliminated in combat are not removed from the game permanently. They are placed in the reserve area of the owning player and they will return to the board at the end of the turn of the owning player together with the units that have been built that turn. Eliminating enemy units in combat, of course, is still very important because it will allow you to take control of the cities and towns that those units are defending, and also because this is an excellent way to disperse powerful armies of the opponent. The opponent may have gathered a powerful army in an X. Those units are eliminated, they go back to the board, but they go back to cities and towns that could potentially build them. So that means that now those units are all scattered around the board. The opponent will have to spend time to put an army together again. During your turn, you can move and attack with any and all of your units in any order you want. That means that you could move with some of your units and use those to attack, then move more units and launch more attacks. It is really great that you have a lot of flexibility here. Infantry units and artillery units move up to 2 hexes per turn, and they have to stop if they enter an X containing enemy units. Well, let's move the artillery unit too. Cavalry units move up to 3 land hexes. All of these land units have to stop if they enter a forest or a mountain hex, unless there is a friendly unit that is already in that hex at the beginning of the turn. In that case, that unit allows friendly units to move through that hex. The units do not have to stop, which means that it is pretty important to place friendly units in difficult terrain that is adjacent to targets that you're planning to attack, because those units will allow your reinforcements to move through the hex and join the fight next turn when you're attacking the X. You must also imagine that there are national roads connecting your towns and cities that are 2 or 3 axes away from one another. Land units can use those roads to travel from a town or city to the next one by spending only a movement point. For this unit, for example, it would be 1 and 2 movement points to travel from there to there. But you cannot use that option if there are enemy units that are blocking the national road. Also, frigates can move up to 5 hexes, and they can pick up and drop off land units as they go. Usually they are restricted to water axes only, but if you have towns or cities that are in axes between 2 water axes, then the frigate can move across those axes. You can imagine that there is a channel that the frigate is using. The combat system is very simple. You roll a number of dice that will depend on the circumstances. Then for each 1, 2, or 3 that is rolled, you inflict a hit on the opponent, and units that are hit are removed from the board and placed in the reserved area on the player aid of the owning player. For each 1 that you roll, you choose the enemy unit that takes the hit. For each 2 or 3, it is the owning player that chooses the unit that takes the hit. Artillery and frigates have a special type of ranged attack called bombardment. They can fire at an enemy that is adjacent or up to 2 hexes away, only in case though that the line of sight is not blocked by mountains, forests, cities or towns. And to bombard an artillery unit or a frigate unit rolls 1 die. A battle is preceded by a pre-battle fire segment during which the artillery units of the attacker attack once, then you have the main battle. The combat system here emphasizes the concept of combined arms. That means that the number of dice that you will roll in combat will depend on the number of types of units that you have present to the fight, and not simply on the number of units. Suppose that yellow is the attacker. Well, the attacker receives 2 attacking dice. If there is cavalry present to the battle, it may be 1 cavalry unit, 10 cavalry units, it is still 2 dice, then a die for infantry and a die for artillery. The defender receives a die for cavalry, a die for infantry, a die for artillery. A die, there is a frigate adjacent to the battle because that frigate supports the battle, and also the terrain may give some dice to the defender. Forests and towns give a defending die to the defender, and mountains and cities 2 dice. Of course, it is important to still have many units present to the battle, even if not all of them can contribute to the defending or attacking dice, because you need to have units to absorb hits so that you are still able to defend or to attack next turn. A battle will last a variable number of rounds, basically until all the units of one of the 2 sides have been eliminated, or until the attacker decides to retreat. The defender never has the option to retreat. The game has several possible victory conditions. At the beginning of each game, the players have to agree on the victory condition that they will use for that game. For example, you can play until one of the players eliminates all the other players, and that player, of course, is the winner. But this mode can be a little annoying if a player is eliminated early on and cannot play for most of the game. A variant that solves this is the subjugation variant, in which a player that has his capital conquered becomes the vassal of the player who took his capital, and now the vassal works in a forced alliance helping the new ruler, so at least that player is still in play. Another way to determine the winner is to end the game the first time that a player takes control of an enemy capital. Another way to determine the winner is to end the game the first time that a player takes control of an enemy capital. At that point, you count victory points based on control of cities and towns on the board, and based on that, you determine who the winner is. There is a variant of this in which you determine the end of the game randomly, but then you still count victory points to determine the winner. Or you can simply play until one of the players reaches 20 victory points based on control of cities and towns, and at that point the game is over and that player is the winner. And there are extra rules that will allow you to make the game more advanced, more meaty, but I find the game charming enough at its basic level, in its basic configuration. This is a game that clearly is very simple, very approachable. You can play it with non-war gamers. I don't think that there will be anybody that will have a problem, picking up the game. And I think that war gamers can enjoy it too, because clearly this is not a simulation, clearly this is not a realistic game in a certain way. I mean, something that I find pretty funny is the scale of the game. I can't figure out that this is a very small world with very small cities, or if those guns have very long range. But when you take into account the fact that this is not a simulation, I think that a war gamer can enjoy it too. I like how the game has different phases throughout the game, and these phases are nicely interconnected. You start with a phase where the players are just building their cities and their towns and gathering resources. Everybody's just happy and feeling rich and wealthy. Everything is easy. You have the impression you can just spread wherever you want, and then soon enough you realize that the other players are getting in your way, and the board starts feeling claustrophobic, and then the first wave of battles starts. And I also like the fact that, in fact, it seems like the war has different levels of progression. You have first some battles probably around the borders when the armies are trying to prevent each other from getting too close to each other's capital. At that time is army versus army in the middle of nowhere, so you're just going to be able to scatter the army of the opponent, not to really destroy anybody. And then you move through some of these waves and you push your border and you finally get to the cities, and then you have more crucial battles. I really like this sense of progression here. I like the fact that terrain changes so much from game to game. Yes, you may have games where the map looks a little weird and some players may be penalized because of the position of their initial city, but overall, terrain is mainly a fun element in this game because you really can exploit it in different ways. You can use your units cleverly to help one another to overcome the difficulties that come from terrain. Sequencing actions is pretty interesting. Again, the way in which you organize your turn, of course, will allow you to use your units a little bit better, a little bit worse if you're not careful. And I like this. I like, in fact, the freedom that you have in the order in which you can move your units and use them to attack and bombard and move more. There is a lot of freedom here. And for a game that is this simple, that has such simple clear rules, not a million of modifiers, simple terrain rules and all that, I think that this is a game that really achieves a lot. This is a game that is entertaining, it is fun to play. Bottom line is that this is a very enjoyable game and I'm happy I discovered it.